A bullied teen stood up for a kid, never dreaming the kid's dad was the school principal. The thought hadn't even crossed Ethan's mind as he'd stepped between the cowering sixth grader and the three hulking eighth graders circling like wolves. All he'd seen was himself 3 years ago, small, terrified, alone. The October wind whipped across Westlake Middle School's courtyard, scattering fallen leaves and carrying jeers that had become the soundtrack to Ethan's existence. He hunched his shoulders against the cold, his too thin jacket offering little protection against the autumn chill or the eyes that followed him. 16 and tall but rail thin, Ethan Morgan had mastered the art of invisibility, or so he thought. "Hey, garbage boy." The nickname sliced through the air like a knife, making Ethan's stomach clench. Ryan Davenport's voice carried across the crowded courtyard, silencing conversations and drawing eyes. "Still wearing your dad's hand-me-downs? Oh wait, your dad doesn't even want you, does he?" Ethan's fingers tightened around the strap of his worn backpack, knuckles whitening. 3 years of this, the taunts, the shoves, the calculated cruelty designed to find every crack in his armor. 3 years since his dad walked out, leaving nothing but a half-empty apartment and a mother who worked double shifts just to keep them afloat. He kept walking, eyes fixed on the cracked concrete. Just 10 more steps to the entrance. 8, 6. A foot appeared in his path, and Ethan went sprawling, his backpack sliding across the pavement. Laughter erupted around him, a wave of sound that burned his ears and flushed his cheeks with humiliation. The concrete bit into his palms as he pushed himself up, refusing to look at Ryan and his friends, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing the moisture gathering in his eyes. "What's wrong, garbage boy? Gonna cry?" Ryan loomed over him, his expensive sneakers entering Ethan's downcast field of vision. "Maybe if you weren't such a worthless freak, your dad would have stuck around." Something hot and dangerous flared in Ethan's chest, but he tamped it down. Fighting back only made it worse. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. Instead, he gathered his scattered belongings, ignoring the foot that deliberately stepped on his math homework, smearing dirt across the page he'd spent hours perfecting. The bell rang, a momentary reprieve. Ethan slipped into the building, finding sanctuary in the bustling hallway where he could disappear into the crowd. His breath came in shallow gasps, his heart hammering against his ribs as if trying to escape. Inside his locker, taped to the door where only he could see it, was a photograph. Ethan at 12, smiling between his parents before everything fell apart. Before his father decided that family was too heavy a burden to bear. Before the electricity got shut off 3 times last year. Before his mother's eyes had taken on that permanent exhaustion that no amount of sleep seemed to cure. Ethan touched the photo lightly, a ritual more than a comfort now. Then he grabbed his biology textbook and shut the locker, locking away that glimpse of a happier time. Miss Winter's biology class was usually Ethan's one safe harbor in the storm of middle school. Today, though, Ryan and his crew filed in after him, their presence turning the classroom toxic. Ethan slid into his seat in the back corner, the perfect vantage point to be forgotten. "Okay, class." Winters began, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Lab partners for today's experiment? I'll be assigning pairs." Ethan's stomach dropped. Partner work was its own special kind of hell. Ryan with Jessica, Aiden with Taylor, Ethan with Ms. Winters consulted her list. "Daniel." Whispers rippled through the classroom. Daniel Adams was new, having transferred to Westlake just 2 weeks ago. Small for his 14 years, with oversized glasses and clothes that screamed, "Trying too hard to fit in," he was the perfect replacement target now that Ethan had mastered the art of not reacting. Daniel glanced nervously at Ethan, then gathered his books and moved to the empty seat beside him. His movements were cautious, like approaching a wild animal that might bolt. "Hi," Daniel whispered, pushing his glasses up with one finger. "I'm not very good at biology." Something in the kid's honest vulnerability made Ethan's chest tighten. "It's okay. I am." They worked in companionable silence, Ethan quietly explaining the steps of the experiment, showing rather than telling whenever possible. For 45 blessed minutes, he forgot about Ryan and the others, focused only on the microscope and the cells they were identifying. "You're really smart," Daniel said as they were cleaning up, his voice tinged with genuine admiration that made Ethan uncomfortable. Compliments were foreign territory, landmines waiting to explode into some new form of mockery. "Just practice," Ethan mumbled, avoiding eye contact. As the bell rang and students flooded into the hallway, Ethan noticed Ryan and his friends closing in on Daniel, who was struggling with an overflowing backpack. The predatory gleam in Ryan's eyes was all too familiar. "Nice glasses, new kid." Ryan sneered, flicking Daniel's face hard enough to knock the glasses askew. Did your mommy pick those out for you? Daniel flinched, fumbling to straighten his glasses as his books tumbled from his arms. The hallway grew quiet, students pausing to watch the familiar drama unfold. Grateful, no doubt, that they weren't the target this time. Ethan froze halfway to the door. Everything in him screamed to keep walking, to not draw attention, to remain invisible. His hand tightened on the strap of his backpack as Daniel knelt to gather his scattered papers. Ryan's foot deliberately coming down on a notebook. Oops! Ryan laughed, grinding his heel. Clumsy me. Daniel didn't cry or protest, just kept his head down, accepting this as the new normal. The resignation in his hunched shoulders was like looking in a mirror, and something inside Ethan cracked open. Before he could think better of it, Ethan was moving, positioning himself between Daniel and Ryan. Leave him alone. The words felt foreign in his mouth, rusty from disuse. His heart pounded so hard he was sure everyone could hear it, blood rushing in his ears. Ryan's eyebrows shot up, surprise quickly morphing into delighted cruelty. Well, Garbage Boy found his voice. He stepped closer, invading Ethan's space, the threat implicit. What are you gonna do about it? Ethan's legs trembled, but he held his ground. Just back off, Ryan. He didn't do anything to you. Neither did you, Ryan countered. But that never stopped me, did it? His voice dropped lower, for Ethan's ears only. You know what happens to heroes in this school. Behind him, Ethan could feel Daniel gathering the last of his books, the rustling of paper, the only sound in the otherwise silent hallway. Mr. Davenport. The voice cut through the tension like a blade. Mr. Coleman, the vice principal, stood at the end of the hallway, his expression stern. Is there a problem here? Ryan's smile was instant and fake. No, sir. Just helping the new kid with his books. Mr. Coleman's eyes narrowed, but without witnesses willing to speak up, there was little he could do. Get to class, all of you. Now. The crowd dispersed, but Ryan brushed deliberately against Ethan's shoulder as he passed. This isn't over, he whispered, his breath hot against Ethan's ear. Not even close. As the hallway emptied, only Ethan and Daniel remained. Daniel clutched his books to his chest like a shield, his eyes wide behind his glasses. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. Ethan shrugged, suddenly embarrassed by his outburst of courage. It's nothing. It's not nothing. Daniel's voice was small but certain. No one's ever stood up for me before. The raw gratitude in the younger boy's eyes made Ethan uncomfortable. He hadn't done it to be a hero. He wasn't even sure why he'd done it. Just watch out for Ryan. He doesn't forget. Daniel nodded solemnly. I'll be careful. He hesitated, then added, My name's Daniel. I know. We're lab partners, Ethan said, already retreating back into his shell. I'm Ethan. I know. Daniel smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. See you tomorrow, Ethan. As Daniel hurried off to his next class, Ethan stood alone in the hallway, a strange feeling expanding in his chest. It wasn't pride exactly, or even satisfaction. It was the faintest whisper of something he hadn't felt in years. Connection. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxiety, Ethan constantly looking over his shoulder for Ryan's inevitable retaliation. By the time the final bell rang, his nerves were stretched to breaking point. He practically ran to his locker, fumbling with the combination in his haste to escape the building. Hey! Ethan jumped, slamming his locker shut to find Daniel standing there, shifting from foot to foot. Sorry, Daniel said quickly. I didn't mean to scare you. You didn't. Ethan lied, heart hammering. What do you want? Daniel fidgeted with the strap of his backpack. I just wanted to say thanks again. For earlier. It's fine. Ethan glanced nervously down the hallway, expecting Ryan to materialize at any moment. But you should probably not be seen talking to me. It'll just make things worse for you. I don't care, Daniel said with unexpected firmness. My dad always says you should thank people properly when they do something kind. The mention of a father sent a small pang through Ethan's chest. Your dad sounds nice, he said, immediately regretting the wistfulness that crept into his voice. He is. Daniel's face lit up. Well, isn't this touching? Ryan's voice sent ice down Ethan's spine. He turned to find Ryan and two of his friends blocking the exit, their postures casual but threatening. Garbage Boy's got himself a little girlfriend. Ryan continued, advancing slowly. How cute. Ethan stepped subtly in front of Daniel, his voice low. Go out the side door, he murmured. I'll handle this. But Daniel stood his ground, surprising Ethan. I'm not leaving you, he said, his voice only slightly wobbly. Ryan laughed, the sound echoing in the nearly empty hallway. Look at that, the freak parade sticking together. Adorable. His expression hardened. Nobody makes me look bad in front of the whole school, garbage boy. Nobody. The first shove caught Ethan off guard, sending him stumbling back against the lockers with a metallic clang. His backpack slipped from his shoulder, hitting the floor as Ryan moved in closer. Not so brave now, are you? Ryan taunted, his friends forming a semicircle around them, cutting off escape routes. Ethan raised his hands. I don't want trouble, Ryan. Should have thought of that before you opened your mouth. Ryan's hand fisted in Ethan's shirt, pinning him against the lockers. The cold metal dug into Ethan's back as Ryan leaned in, his breath smelling of mint gum and malice. I'm going to enjoy this. Stop it! Daniel's voice cracked as he tried to pull Ryan's arm away, his small hands ineffective against the larger boy's grip. Leave him alone. Ryan's friend Brad laughed, shoving Daniel hard enough to send him sprawling across the linoleum floor. Stay down, shrimp, or you're next. Something in Ethan snapped at the sight of Daniel sprawled on the floor, glasses askew. Years of repressed anger surged through him, hot and electric. He brought his knee up sharply, catching Ryan in the stomach. Ryan doubled over with a whoosh of expelled air, his grip loosening. Ethan twisted away, putting space between them, his hands curling into fists for the first time since 7th grade. You're dead, Ryan wheezed, straightening up with murder in his eyes. Absolutely dead. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Ryan lunged forward just as a deep voice boomed down the hallway. Enough! The single word froze everyone in place. Ethan turned to see a tall man striding toward them, his face a thundercloud of barely contained fury. Mr. Pierce, the new principal who had started at Westlake just a month ago. Unlike his predecessor, who managed the school from behind a desk, Mr. Pierce was known for roaming the hallways, appearing when least expected. But what shocked Ethan to his core was Daniel scrambling to his feet and running not away from the confrontation, but toward the principal. Dad! Daniel cried, the word echoing in the suddenly silent hallway. Dad, they were going to hurt Ethan. He was just trying to protect me. The word ricocheted inside Ethan's skull like a bullet. Dad. The principal was Daniel's father. The principal was Daniel's father. Ryan's face drained of color so quickly it was almost comical. His friends took involuntary steps backward, already formulating denials. Mr. Pierce's hand came to rest protectively on Daniel's shoulder, but his eyes, the same warm brown as his son's, Ethan now noticed, were fixed on the scene before him. Mr. Davenport, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Hayes, he said, his voice deceptively calm. My office. Now. Ryan opened his mouth, but the look in Mr. Pierce's eyes silenced whatever excuse he'd been about to offer. With one last venomous glare at Ethan, Ryan and his friends slouched off toward the principal's office. Mr. Pierce turned to Ethan, his expression softening slightly. Are you all right, Mr. Morgan? Ethan nodded mutely, still processing the revelation. Daniel Adams was the principal's son. The principal's son. The implications spun in his head like leaves caught in a whirlwind. Daniel told me what happened earlier today. Mr. Pierce continued, his voice gentler now. That was a brave thing you did, standing up for him. Warmth bloomed in Ethan's chest at the unexpected praise, followed immediately by suspicion. Adults said things like that, but rarely meant them, rarely followed through. It was nothing, sir, Ethan mumbled, retrieving his backpack from the floor and avoiding eye contact. It wasn't nothing to my son, Mr. Pierce countered quietly. And it isn't nothing to me. Daniel was watching Ethan with something like awe, making Ethan shift uncomfortably. He wasn't a hero. He was just a kid who'd been pushed too far. Can I go now? Ethan asked, desperately wanting to escape the intensity of the moment. Mr. Pierce studied him for a long moment, then nodded. You may go, Mr. Morgan, but please know my door is always open if you need to talk. Ethan mumbled a thank you and hurried past them, feeling Daniel's eyes on his back all the way to the exit. Only when he burst outside into the cool afternoon air did he allow himself to breathe, gulping oxygen as if he'd been underwater. A bullied teen stood up for a kid, never dreaming the kid's dad was the school principal. The absurdity of it made a slightly hysterical laugh bubble up in Ethan's throat. Of all the students in all the schools, he'd chosen to defend the principal's son. Whether that was the luckiest or unluckiest moment of his life remained to be seen. The walk home from school had always been Ethan's time to decompress, to let the day's tensions melt away with each step. Today, though, his mind buzzed with replays of the confrontation, with Daniel's unexpected bravery, with the revelation that still felt surreal. Westfield Gardens appeared ahead, the apartment complex where he and his mom had moved after the divorce. The building's beige exterior was peeling in places, The small patches of grass more brown than green, but the rent was affordable, barely. Ethan climbed the 3 flights of stairs to apartment 3C, fishing his key from his pocket. Inside, the apartment was silent and dim. His mother still at her shift at the hospital where she worked as a nursing assistant. The quiet used to bother him, but now he welcomed it, dropping his backpack on the kitchen table and opening the refrigerator. A note was stuck to a covered plate. Leftover lasagna. Heat 2 minutes. Love you. His mom's handwriting brought a small smile to his face. Despite everything, the double shifts, the constant struggle to keep up with bills, the bone-deep exhaustion that never seemed to leave her, she still found time for these small gestures. Ethan heated the lasagna and settled at the table with his homework, trying to focus on algebra instead of replaying the day's events. But the numbers swam before his eyes, refusing to make sense as his mind kept returning to Daniel's face. When he stood up to Ryan, to Mr. Pierce's words, "That was a brave thing you did." Brave. Not a word Ethan would ever have associated with himself. His phone buzzed with a text, pulling him from his thoughts. Unknown number. "Hi, it's Daniel. Hope it's okay, I got your number from the class directory. Just wanted to say thanks again for today. You were awesome." Ethan stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Part of him wanted to ignore it. Getting involved with anyone, even as just a friend, meant complications. Meant being visible, meant being vulnerable. But another part, a part he'd almost forgotten existed, craved the connection. "No problem," he finally typed back. "You okay?" The response came almost immediately. "Yeah. Dad made sure Ryan and his friends got detention for a month. And they have to do community service." The corner of Ethan's mouth twitched upward. It was more punishment than Ryan had ever received, despite years of tormenting other students. Then before he could stop himself, Ethan added, "Why didn't you tell me your dad was the principal?" There was a longer pause before Daniel's reply appeared. "People treat me differently when they know. Wanted to make real friends first." The honesty of the answer caught Ethan off guard. He understood all too well the desire to be seen for who you were, not for your circumstances. "Makes sense," he texted back. "See you tomorrow in bio?" Daniel asked. Ethan hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen. He could say no. Could go back to his invisible life. Head down, attracting no attention. The safer choice. "Yeah, William. See you tomorrow." As he hit send, something shifted in his chest. The faintest glimmer of something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Something that felt suspiciously like hope. Morning arrived with a persistent drizzle, the kind that wasn't heavy enough for an umbrella, but still managed to soak through jackets and dampen spirits. Ethan pulled his hood up as he walked to school, his breath fogging in the chilly October air. The school building loomed ahead, and Ethan felt the familiar dread pooling in his stomach. Would today be worse because of yesterday? Would Ryan find some way around his punishment? Ethan! Wait up! He turned to see Daniel jogging toward him, raindrops beating on his glasses. The younger boy was grinning, seemingly unbothered by the weather. "Morning." Daniel fell into step beside him, slightly out of breath. "Dad dropped me off early for his meeting, but I saw you walking up." Ethan nodded, uncomfortable with the easy familiarity. "Morning." If Daniel noticed his reticence, he didn't show it, chattering away about the science homework as they entered the building. Ethan was acutely aware of the stares they attracted, the known outcast and the principal's son walking together. The whispers followed them down the hallway like shadows. "Everyone's looking at us," Ethan muttered, hunching his shoulders. Daniel glanced around, then shrugged. "Let them look." There was something in his casual dismissal that Ethan envied, a confidence that came perhaps from having a father who commanded respect, who was present, who cared. They parted ways at Ethan's locker, Daniel heading to his own homeroom with a cheerful wave that drew more curious stares. Ethan focused on gathering his books, trying to ignore the newfound attention. Well, look who it is." Ryan's voice sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He turned slowly to find Ryan leaning against the adjacent locker, his usual smirk in place despite yesterday's events. "What do you want, Ryan?" Ethan asked, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "Just wanted to congratulate you on your new friendship." Ryan's tone was casual, but his eyes were hard. "Smart move, sucking up to the principal's kid. But don't think your little bodyguard will be around to protect you forever." Ethan slammed his locker shut, something hot and defiant rising in his chest. "Is that supposed to scare me?" Ryan's eyebrows shot up at the unexpected response. For a moment, genuine surprise flickered across his face before he masked it with a sneer. "You should be scared, Morgan. Very scared." But as Ryan shouldered past him, deliberately bumping him hard enough to make him stumble, Ethan realized something startling. He wasn't scared. Not really. Not like before. The morning classes passed in a blur of lectures and assignments. Ethan found himself watching the clock, counting down to biology class with an anticipation that felt foreign. When the bell finally rang, he was one of the first to enter Ms. Winter's classroom. Daniel was already there, saving him a seat with a backpack. He waved Ethan over with an enthusiasm that drew more curious glances. "I was thinking about our lab project," Daniel said as Ethan slid into the chair beside him. "What if we did something on cellular regeneration? Dad got me this cool microscope for my birthday, and we could use it if you wanted to come over sometime." The casual invitation took Ethan by surprise. "Huh. Come over? To your house?" Daniel nodded, pushing his glasses up. "Yeah. I mean, if you want to." Dad said it was okay. "We've got a ton of science books, too." He used to teach biology before he became a principal. The idea of going to the principal's house was surreal enough that Ethan almost laughed. But there was something appealing about it, too. The chance to work on a project without worrying about the ancient equipment at school, without the constant awareness of Ryan and his friends. "Maybe," Ethan said finally. "I'd have to ask my mom." Daniel beamed as if Ethan had already agreed. "Cool. It would be Friday after school if that works." Before Ethan could respond, Ms. Winters called the class to order, launching into a lecture on mitosis. But Ethan found it hard to concentrate, his mind wandering to the possibility of Friday, to the strange new territory of friendship he was tentatively entering. When class ended, Daniel lingered, clearly waiting to walk with him. "What class do you have next?" he asked as they entered the busy hallway. "English with Mr. Abernathy." "I've got math, but we could meet for lunch." Daniel's hopeful expression made him look even younger than his 14 years. Something in Ethan wanted to refuse, to retreat back to his solitary table in the corner of the cafeteria. Change was dangerous. Visibility was dangerous. But he found himself nodding. "Okay, I usually sit by the windows." Daniel's face lit up. "Great, see you then." As Daniel disappeared into the crowd, Ethan noticed Ryan watching from across the hallway, his expression calculating. But instead of the usual fear, Ethan felt a strange new sensation. Determination. He held Ryan's gaze for a moment before continuing to class, his back straight. The lunchroom was its usual chaos of noise and movement when Ethan entered, tray in hand. He headed for his usual spot, half expecting Daniel to have forgotten or changed his mind. But there he was, already seated and waving enthusiastically. As Ethan made his way over, he became aware of the eyes following him, the whispers that trailed in his wake. Daniel Adams, the principal's son, waiting for Ethan Morgan, the school's designated punching bag. It didn't compute in the carefully structured social hierarchy of middle school. "I got here early to save us seats," Daniel explained as Ethan sat down. "The pizza's actually good today." Ethan glanced at his own sad-looking sandwich. "I usually bring lunch," he said, not adding that it was because the reduced-price lunches still cost more than they could comfortably afford. Daniel nodded, taking a bite of his pizza. "Smart. Cafeteria food is hit or miss." He pushed a wrapped cookie across the table. "Well, want to trade? Your chips for my cookie?" The casual offer made something twist in Ethan's chest. Such a normal interaction, the kind he'd watched other kids have for years while he sat alone. "Sure," he said, sliding his chips over. They ate in surprisingly comfortable silence for a few minutes before Daniel spoke again. "Some kids asked me why I was sitting with you," he said matter-of-factly. "Like it was weird or something." Ethan stiffened. "What did you tell them?" "That you're my friend." Daniel said it simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "That you stood up for me when no one else would." "Friend?" The word hung in the air between them, fragile and new. Ethan didn't know how to respond, so he took another bite of his sandwich instead, trying to ignore the warm feeling spreading through his chest. "My dad wants to meet you properly," Daniel continued, seemingly unfazed by Ethan's silence. "He's really grateful, you know, for what you did." Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Anyone would have done it." "No," Daniel said with surprising firmness. "They wouldn't. Everyone just watched. You were the only one who helped." Before Ethan could formulate a response, a shadow fell across their table. He looked up to find Jessica Chen, one of the popular girls who usually sat with Ryan's crowd, standing there with her tray. "Is it okay if I sit here?" she asked, her voice tentative. "The other tables are full." Ethan glanced around. At least 3 tables had empty seats. His eyes narrowed suspiciously, but Daniel was already nodding. "Sure." Daniel scooted over to make room. "I'm Daniel. This is Ethan. I know, Jessica said, sliding onto the bench. Everyone's talking about how you stood up to Ryan yesterday. This was directed at Ethan, her expression a mix of curiosity and something else. Respect, maybe. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't a big deal. It kind of was, Jessica insisted. Ryan's been terrorizing people since elementary school, and nobody ever calls him on it. She lowered her voice. A lot of kids are glad someone finally did. The idea that others had noticed, had cared, had maybe even silently cheered him on, was a revelation. Ethan had been so wrapped up in his own isolation that he'd never considered others might feel the same way about Ryan's reign of terror. Is that why you're sitting here? He asked bluntly. To get a closer look at the freak show? Jessica flushed. No, she hesitated. Ryan's been awful to me too. Not like with you, but little things. Comments about my weight, jokes that aren't funny. Her fingers fidgeted with her napkin. When I saw what you did, it made me think maybe I don't have to put up with it either. The honest vulnerability in her voice struck a chord in Ethan. He'd been so focused on his own pain that he'd never considered how many others suffered under Ryan's casual cruelty. You don't, he said finally. Have to put up with it, I mean. Jessica gave him a small, genuine smile that transformed her face. Thanks. The rest of lunch passed in surprisingly easy conversation. Jessica drawing Ethan out about his interest in science, Daniel chiming in with enthusiastic questions. By the time the bell rang, Ethan felt oddly lighter, as if some invisible weight had shifted. As they cleared their trays, Jessica touched his arm lightly. Thanks for letting me sit with you guys, she said. Maybe I could join you tomorrow too. The question held more than just a request for a lunch seat. It was an olive branch, a tentative reaching across social divides that had seemed insurmountable just days ago. Ethan glanced at Daniel, who nodded encouragingly. Yeah, Ethan said. That would be okay. Jessica's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. With a small wave, she hurried off to her next class, leaving Ethan with the strange sense that something fundamental had shifted in his world. She's nice, Daniel observed as they headed toward the exit. I think she likes you, Ethan snorted. She doesn't even know me. Maybe she wants to. Daniel's voice held no teasing, just simple observation. People are noticing you now, Ethan. That's a good thing. But as they parted ways for afternoon classes, Ethan wasn't so sure. Visibility meant vulnerability. Friendship meant the potential for loss. And yet, there had been something undeniably warm about sharing lunch with others. About Jessica's smile, about Daniel's easy acceptance. Perhaps, just perhaps, some changes were worth the risk. The afternoon dragged, each class feeling longer than the last. By the time the final bell rang, Ethan was exhausted from the emotional whiplash of the day. He gathered his books quickly, hoping to slip out before encountering Ryan or any more unexpected social interactions. As he rounded the corner toward the main exit, he nearly collided with Mr. Pierce, who was emerging from the administration office. Mr. Morgan, the principal said, steadying him with a hand on his shoulder. Just the person I was hoping to see. Ethan took an instinctive step back. Sir? Mr. Pierce's expression was warm, lacking the stern authority he'd worn when confronting Ryan. I wanted to speak with you about yesterday. Do you have a moment? Everything in Ethan wanted to refuse, to mumble an excuse and escape. But he found himself nodding, following Mr. Pierce back into the office and through to the principal's private space. The principal's office was nothing like Ethan expected. Rather than the sterile, intimidating environment he'd imagined, it was warm and cluttered with books. Photos of Daniel at various ages lined one shelf, alongside academic certificates and what appeared to be science fair ribbons. Please sit. Mr. Pierce gestured to a chair before perching on the edge of his desk, rather than retreating behind it. The casual posture was deliberately disarming, Ethan realized. Am I in trouble? He asked, unable to help himself. Mr. Pierce's eyebrows rose. For defending my son from bullies? Quite the opposite. He studied Ethan with those eyes so similar to Daniel's. I wanted to thank you properly without an audience. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. It really wasn't anything special, sir. I disagree. Mr. Pierce's voice was gentle but firm. Daniel told me this wasn't the first time Ryan and his friends had targeted you. Heat crept up Ethan's neck. No, sir. And yet you still stepped in to help a boy you barely knew. Mr. Pierce leaned forward slightly. That kind of courage is rare, Mr. Morgan, especially in middle school, where the social consequences can be significant. The principal's understanding of the complex social dynamics made Ethan look up in surprise. Most adults dismiss teenage hierarchies as trivial, failing to grasp how all-encompassing they felt when you were living within them. Daniel mentioned you're interested in science. Mr. Pierce continued. He also said you might be coming over on Friday to work on a project? Ethan nodded cautiously. He invited me, but I haven't asked my mom yet. Well, I hope you can make it. Daniel doesn't make friends easily. We've moved several times for my work. A shadow crossed the principal's face. It's been just the two of us since his mother passed away 5 years ago. The casual revelation stunned Ethan. Daniel, with his bright smiles and easy chatter, carried the same wound he did, the absence of a parent. Though in Daniel's case, the absence was permanent, immutable. I didn't know, Ethan said quietly. About his mom, Mr. Pierce nodded. He doesn't talk about it much, but I think that's why you're standing up for him meant so much. Daniel sees something in you, Mr. Morgan. A kindred spirit, perhaps. The words settled in Ethan's chest, unexpectedly heavy with meaning. A kindred spirit. Was that what had drawn him to protect Daniel in that moment? Some unconscious recognition of shared pain? I should go, Ethan said, suddenly needing space to process. My mom will be wondering where I am. Mr. Pierce straightened, respecting the boundary. Of course. But Mr. Morgan, Ethan, my door is always open. And not just as the principal. The implication was clear. Mr. Pierce was offering more than just academic support. He was offering understanding, perhaps even guidance. The kind that Ethan had been missing since his father walked out 3 years ago. Thank you, sir. Ethan managed, gathering his backpack. As he left the office, a strange mix of emotions swirled in his chest. Confusion, hope, and something that felt dangerously like belonging. Friday arrived with unexpected sunshine, the dreary week of rain giving way to crisp autumn brightness. Ethan dressed with slightly more care than usual, selecting his least faded jeans and the one hoodie without frayed cuffs. His mother had given permission for him to go to Daniel's after school, her eyes bright with surprised pleasure at the mention of a friend. The principal's son? She'd asked, pausing and folding laundry. That's the boy you stood up for? Ethan had nodded, explaining about the science project, carefully omitting the confrontation with Ryan. His mother had enough to worry about without adding school bullies to the list. Of course you can go, she'd said, pulling him into a quick, fierce hug that smelled of hospital antiseptic and the vanilla lotion she'd used since he was small. I'm so proud of you, Ethan. The words had lingered with him, warming him from the inside like a small flame. School passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Lunch had once again included Jessica, along with 2 other students who had drifted to their table, Tyler from Ethan's math class and Sophia, who shared art with Daniel. The tentative formation of a group, drawn together by some invisible thread of mutual recognition. Ryan had kept his distance, though his glares promised future retribution. But even that couldn't dampen the strange buoyancy Ethan felt as the final bell rang. Daniel waited for him by the front doors, practically bouncing with excitement. Dad's picking us up, he explained as they exited the building. He had a meeting with the school board, but he should be here soon. Sure enough, a dark blue sedan pulled up moments later, Mr. Pierce waving from the driver's seat. Daniel climbed into the front, leaving Ethan the back seat. Hello, Ethan. Mr. Pierce greeted him warmly. I hope you're hungry. Daniel insisted we stop for pizza on the way home. The casual inclusion in their family ritual made Ethan's throat tighten unexpectedly. That sounds great. Thank you, sir. James, please. Outside of school, I'm just Daniel's dad. The drive to the pizza place was filled with Daniel's chatter about their biology project, his enthusiasm infectious. Mr. Pierce James asked thoughtful questions that revealed his own scientific background, drawing Ethan into the conversation with genuine interest in his ideas. By the time they were seated in the restaurant, Ethan had almost forgotten to be nervous. The Pierces had a way of making space for him in their conversations, of drawing him out without pressure. It was so different from the tense meals he sometimes shared with his mother, both of them too tired or preoccupied to do more than exchange perfunctory questions about their days. So, Ethan, James said as they waited for their pizza, Daniel tells me you're quite the scientist. Any thoughts about what you might want to study in college? The casual assumption that college was in his future made Ethan pause. With their financial situation, he'd always viewed college as a distant, unlikely dream. I haven't really thought about it, he admitted. Well, you should. With your aptitude, scholarships would certainly be an option. James spoke with the confidence of someone who knew the system. The school has resources to help with applications when the time comes. The possibility, presented so matter-of-factly, planted a small seed in Ethan's mind. Maybe college wasn't as unreachable as he thought. Their pizza arrived, momentarily halting the conversation. As they ate, Daniel regaled them with a story about his disastrous attempt at a volcano experiment in 4th grade, his animated gestures nearly knocking over his soda. The baking soda went everywhere, he explained, laughing. Dad was finding it in his shoes for weeks. James groaned dramatically. I still have traumatic flashbacks whenever I see a science fair announcement. Their easy laughter, the shared memory, made something ache in Ethan's chest. This was what family looked like. Inside jokes, gentle teasing, the invisible threads of shared history binding them together. It was everything his own home life had lost when his father walked out. What about you, Ethan? Daniel asked, pulling him from his thoughts. Any science experiment disasters? Ethan hesitated, then found himself sharing the story of how he'd tried to grow crystals in his bedroom closet in 5th grade, only to have the solution spill and create a crusty blue mess that his mother had initially mistaken for a mold outbreak. Their genuine laughter at his story felt like a gift, the memory transforming from embarrassing to amusing in the retelling. By the time they finished their meal and drove to the Pierce's home, Ethan felt more relaxed than he had in years. The house itself was another surprise. Modest but warm, with bookshelves lining the living room walls, and what appeared to be Daniel's science fair projects displayed proudly alongside family photos. The microscope's in my room, Daniel said, leading the way upstairs. Dad converted the spare bedroom into a mini lab for my birthday last year. The mini lab turned out to be a converted bedroom with a proper workbench, microscope, and enough equipment to make their school's science lab look pathetic in comparison. Ethan couldn't help the small gasp that escaped him. This is amazing, he said, running a finger along the edge of the workbench. Daniel beamed. Dad believes in hands-on learning. He says textbooks only get you so far. For the next 2 hours, they lost themselves in experimentation, preparing slides and taking turns at the microscope. Daniel was a surprisingly focused lab partner, his earlier chattiness giving way to methodical precision. They fell into an easy rhythm, each building on the other's observations, stopping occasionally to document their findings. The sun was beginning to set when James knocked on the open door, carrying a tray with cookies and soda. How's the project coming along? Daniel launched into an excited explanation of their progress, while Ethan carefully labeled their latest slide. There was something peaceful about the moment. The golden afternoon light streaming through the window, the smell of chocolate chip cookies, the animated conversation between father and son that somehow included him too. I should probably head home soon, Ethan said reluctantly, checking the time. My mom will be wondering where I am. I'll drive you, James offered immediately. Just let me grab my keys. As James disappeared downstairs, Daniel turned to Ethan. This was fun, he said, uncharacteristically serious. Thanks for coming over. Thanks for inviting me, Ethan replied, surprising himself with his sincerity. Your dad he's really nice. Daniel nodded, a shadow crossing his face. He tries hard. Since Mom died, it's just been us. He had to learn to be both parents, you know? The quiet confidence with which Daniel spoke of his loss made Ethan's throat tighten. My dad left when I was 13, he found himself saying. Just walked out one day, said he needed to find himself. The bitterness in his voice surprised even him. He sends a card at Christmas sometimes. It was the first time he'd spoken about it to anyone outside his immediate family. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Daniel didn't offer platitudes or awkward sympathy. Instead, he nodded, understanding in his eyes. That sucks, he said simply. I'm sorry. The acknowledgement, free of pity, was exactly what Ethan needed. Yeah, it does. They packed up their project in companionable silence, the shared vulnerability creating a new layer to their budding friendship. The ride home was quiet, James sensing the mood and not pushing conversation. When they pulled up outside Westfield Gardens, he turned to Ethan. You're welcome at our house anytime, Ethan. I mean that. The sincerity in his voice made Ethan's chest tighten again. Thank you, Sir James, for everything. As he climbed the stairs to his apartment, Ethan realized he was smiling. For the first time in years, the weekend ahead didn't stretch before him like an empty wasteland of loneliness. He had plans to meet Daniel and possibly Jessica at the library on Sunday. He had a science project that excited him. There was no other word for it, friends. A bullied teen stood up for a kid, never dreaming the kid's dad was the school principal. And somehow that one moment of courage had cracked open a door he'd thought permanently closed. The door to connection, to possibility, to hope. Monday morning dawned with a surprising sense of anticipation rather than dread. Ethan found himself actually looking forward to school, to seeing Daniel and Jessica, to working on their project, to the possibility that today might bring something good. The feeling lasted right up until he rounded the corner to his locker and found Ryan waiting, flanked by his usual cronies. Well, if it isn't the principal's pet," Ryan sneered, his voice carrying in the crowded hallway. "Enjoying your special treatment, garbage boy?" Ethan tensed, his newfound confidence wavering. He'd known this confrontation was coming. Ryan wasn't the type to let perceived humiliation go unanswered. "Leave me alone, Ryan," Ethan said, trying to step around him to reach his locker. Ryan moved to block him, crowding into his space. "Or what? You'll run to your new best friend's daddy? Everyone knows that's the only reason you're hanging out with that weirdo. Protection." Something hot and fierce flared in Ethan's chest at the dismissal of his friendship with Daniel. "You don't know anything about it," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I know you're pathetic," Ryan countered, shoving Ethan hard enough to make him stumble back against the lockers. "Sucking up to the principal's kid, pretending you're suddenly not a loser." The hallway had grown quiet, students watching with the familiar mixture of fascination and relief that it wasn't them in the spotlight. Ethan felt the weight of their stares, the old shame threatening to overwhelm him. Then from the crowd, a voice spoke up. "Back off, Ryan." Jessica stepped forward, her chin raised despite the slight tremor in her hands. "Seriously, just leave him alone." Ryan's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "Wow, garbage boy. Got yourself a girlfriend too? Must be nice having the fattest girl in school defending you." Jessica flinched at the cruel words but held her ground. "Better fat than stupid," she retorted, her voice only slightly wobbly. "And Ethan's twice the person you'll ever be." Ryan's face darkened with anger, his hands curling into fists. For a moment, Ethan thought he might actually hit Jessica. Social conventions about not hitting girls be damned. "Is there a problem here, Mr.?" Coleman's voice cut through the tension. The vice principal's gaze swept over the gathered students, lingering on Ryan's aggressive stance. "No problem, sir," Ryan said smoothly, his face transforming into a mask of innocence. "Just talking with my friends, Mr." Coleman's eyes narrowed skeptically, but as usual, without direct evidence of wrongdoing, there was little he could do. "Get to class, all of you." The bell's about to ring. As the crowd dispersed, Jessica moved to Ethan's side. "You okay?" she asked quietly. Ethan nodded, a lump forming in his throat at her unexpected defense. "You didn't have to do that," he murmured as they walked toward their first classes. Jessica shrugged, though her hands were still trembling slightly. "Friends stick up for each other, right? Friends." There was that word again, spoken with such simple conviction. "Right," Ethan agreed, a warmth spreading through his chest despite the lingering adrenaline from the confrontation. "Thanks, Jessica." She gave him a small smile. "See you at lunch?" "Yeah," he said. "See you at lunch." As he settled into his first class, Ethan found himself replaying the moment. Not Ryan's taunts, but Jessica's unexpected defense. The way she'd stepped forward despite her obvious fear. The way she'd called him her friend without hesitation. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he'd thought. The weeks that followed settled into a new pattern. Ethan, Daniel, Jessica, and occasionally Tyler and Sophia claimed their table in the cafeteria, creating a small island of belonging in the social wilderness of middle school. Their biology project earned them the highest grade in the class, Ms. Winters citing their exceptional research methodology. Ryan continued his campaign of intimidation, but its effectiveness was blunted by the simple fact that Ethan was no longer alone. It was harder to terrorize someone who had people willing to stand beside them, to walk with them between classes, to save them a seat at lunch. November brought colder weather and the first hints of the holiday season. Decorations appeared in store windows, and the school announced its annual food drive for local families in need, a charity that Ethan's own family had benefited from the previous year, though no one at school knew that. "We should volunteer," Daniel suggested one day at lunch, gesturing to the food drive sign-up sheet posted on the cafeteria wall. "Dad says it looks good for college applications." Jessica nodded enthusiastically. "My sister did it last year. You get to help organize everything and then deliver the baskets to families." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, the familiar shame rising in his throat. The memory of last year's delivery was still sharp. The sympathetic smile of the student volunteers, the way his mother had blinked back tears as she accepted the basket with forced cheerfulness. "I don't think I can," he said vaguely. "I have to help my mom with stuff." Daniel looked disappointed but didn't push. "Maybe next year?" "Maybe." Ethan agreed, relieved when the conversation shifted to the upcoming science fair. But the food drive remained a constant presence as boxes appeared in classrooms and announcements reminded students to bring in canned goods. Ethan contributed what he could. A few cans purchased with money saved from his lunch allowance, but the guilt of his secret weighed on him. It was Jessica who noticed first, cornering him after English class with concern in her eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. "You've been acting weird ever since the food drive started." Ethan shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." Jessica's voice was gentle but firm. "You can talk to me, you know. Whatever it is." The sincerity in her voice cracked something open in Ethan's chest. Before he could think better of it, the truth spilled out. "My family got one of those baskets last year," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "After my dad left, things got tight. Mom works all the time, but sometimes it's not enough." Shame burned in his throat. "I don't want anyone to know." He expected pity, maybe even disgust. Instead, Jessica's expression softened with understanding. "My dad lost his job 2 years ago," she said quietly. "We almost lost our house. If my grandparents hadn't helped." She shrugged. "It happens, Ethan. It doesn't make you less." The simple acceptance in her words made Ethan's eyes sting. "I just don't want Daniel to know." "Or anyone else." Jessica nodded. "I won't tell anyone." "But Ethan?" "Daniel wouldn't care." "Not the way you think." Maybe she was right. But the thought of seeing pity in Daniel's eyes, or worse, in Mr. Pierce's, was more than Ethan could bear. He'd keep this one secret a little longer. The Monday before Thanksgiving, Ethan arrived at school to find an unusual buzz of excitement. Students gathered in clusters, whispering and pointing at a notice board where the winter dance information was usually posted. What's going on?" he asked Daniel, who was practically vibrating with excitement. "Dad announced a special project," Daniel explained, dragging Ethan toward the board. "Look!" The notice announced a new initiative, Westlake Community Action Team. Students could apply to join a committee focused on identifying and addressing needs within the school community. Everything from tutoring programs to support for struggling families. "Dad's been planning this for months," Daniel continued. "It's going to be amazing. You have to apply with me." Ethan scanned the requirements. Good academic standing, teacher recommendations, and a personal essay about why you wanted to join. At the bottom in bold, "Applications due December 1st. "I don't know." He hedged, thinking of his mother's increasing hours at the hospital as the holiday season approached. Of the electricity bill he'd seen her worrying over last night. "I'm pretty busy." "Please." Daniel's eyes were earnest behind his glasses. "Dad says it'll be a real chance to make changes around here. And you're exactly the kind of person they need. Someone who stands up for others." The genuine belief in Daniel's voice made refusal harder. "I'll think about it," Ethan promised. The day passed in a flurry of pre-holiday assessments and increasingly excited chatter about Thanksgiving break. By lunch, it seemed everyone was talking about the community action team. "Are you applying?" Jessica asked as she slid into her seat at their table. Ethan shrugged. "Maybe." "Are you?" "Definitely," Jessica said. "My mom thinks it would be good for me to get more involved at school." She hesitated, then added more quietly, "Plus, I really like the idea of helping people who need it, without making them feel bad about needing help." Her pointed look told Ethan she was thinking of their earlier conversation. Before he could respond, Mr. Pierce appeared at their table, smiling at the group but clearly there to speak with his son. "Daniel, I need to borrow you for a moment. Your grandmother called the office. Something about Thanksgiving plans." As Daniel hurried off with his father, Jessica leaned closer to Ethan. "You should apply," she said softly. "You know better than most people what some families need." Ethan stared at his sandwich, conflicted. "What if people find out? About my family? So what if they do?" Jessica's voice was gentle but challenging. "Maybe that's exactly why you should be on the committee. To make sure help is given in a way that respects people's dignity." Her words lingered with Ethan throughout the afternoon, a persistent whisper beneath the surface of his thoughts. By the time he walked home, the application form was folded in his pocket, a possibility he couldn't quite dismiss. His mother was already home when he arrived, a rare occurrence that immediately put him on alert. She sat at the kitchen table, still in her scrubs, staring at a pile of mail with the expression she wore when trying not to show worry. "Mom? Everything okay?" She looked up, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Fine, honey. Just some bills." She gestured to the empty chair across from her. "How was school?" Ethan sat, placing his backpack on the floor beside him. "Good." They announced a new program today, a student committee to help with community projects. He hesitated, then pulled out the folded application. I was thinking about applying. His mother's expression softened into genuine interest. That sounds wonderful, Ethan. What kind of projects? All kinds of things. Tutoring, food drives, maybe even a winter coat collection. He traced the edge of the paper with his finger. Mr. Pierce, Daniel's dad, is organizing it. The principal? His mother's eyebrows rose. I still can't believe you're friends with the principal's son. It's like something from a movie. Ethan smiled despite himself. Daniel's really nice, Mom. And his dad is too. They've been good to me. A shadow crossed his mother's face. Not jealousy, but perhaps a hint of sadness that others were providing something for her son that circumstances had made difficult for her to give. I'm glad, she said softly. You deserve good friends, Ethan. The application sat between them on the table, a bridge to possibilities neither had voiced. The thing is, Ethan said slowly, I'd have to write an essay about why I want to help. And I keep thinking about last year, when we got the Thanksgiving basket from the school. His mother's face tightened, the memory clearly painful for her too. Oh, Ethan, not because it was bad, he hurried to explain, but because I remember how it felt. Like everyone was looking at us, pitying us. I don't want other kids to feel that way. He met his mother's eyes. I want to help, but in a way that doesn't make people feel less. Tears welled in his mother's eyes, and she reached across the table to take his hand. When did you get so wise? She asked, her voice thick with emotion. Your father is missing out on knowing the amazing young man you're becoming. The praise made Ethan's chest tighten with a complex mixture of pride and lingering hurt. So you think I should apply? I think, his mother said carefully, that your perspective would be incredibly valuable. And I think helping others might help heal some of your own wounds too. That night after dinner, Ethan sat at the kitchen table and began to write his essay. Not about abstract concepts of community service or college applications, but about dignity. About how help should lift people up, not remind them of what they lack. About how everyone deserves to be seen as whole, not defined by their circumstances. When he finished, he read it over once, then folded it carefully and slipped it into the application envelope. Whatever happened next, he had spoken his truth. The day before Thanksgiving break, Ethan found himself unexpectedly invited to the Pierce's home for dinner. His mother had been called in for an emergency shift at the hospital, leaving him alone for the evening. It's no trouble at all, James insisted when he called to extend the invitation. We'd love to have you. The Pierce's house was even warmer in the evening, lights glowing from windows and the smell of cooking filling the air. Daniel greeted him at the door with his usual enthusiasm, dragging him inside to show him a new science magazine that had just arrived. Dinner was a casual affair, homemade pizza that Daniel and Ethan helped assemble, each creating their own combination of toppings. The easy domesticity of the scene made Ethan's chest ache with a mixture of gratitude and longing. Did you submit your application? James asked as they ate, his tone conversational rather than pressuring. Ethan nodded. Yesterday. Excellent, James said, genuine pleasure in his voice. Daniel showed me his essay last night. I was quite impressed with his ideas. Daniel beamed at the praise. Dad says the committee will be announced the Monday after Thanksgiving break. James nodded. We had an overwhelming response, over 50 applications for 12 spots. The faculty committee is reviewing them now. The news made Ethan's stomach clench with anxiety. 50 applications? His chances seemed suddenly much slimmer. After dinner, as Daniel disappeared upstairs to get a book he wanted to show Ethan, James gestured for Ethan to join him in the living room. I wanted to talk to you about something, he said, his expression more serious than usual. Daniel mentioned that you seemed hesitant about the community action team at first. Ethan shifted uncomfortably on the couch. Just busy, I guess. James studied him with gentle perceptiveness. Ethan, I hope you know you can be honest with me. About anything. Something in his tone made Ethan look up, meeting the principal's eyes. There was no pity there, just genuine concern and what looked like understanding. Daniel doesn't know, James continued quietly. But I'm aware of your family's situation. As principal, I have access to the records of which families received assistance last year. Heat flooded Ethan's face, shame rising like bile in his throat. Oh, I'm telling you this not to embarrass you, James said quickly, but because I want you to understand something important. Needing help doesn't diminish your worth. Not in my eyes, not in Daniel's, not in anyone's whose opinion matters. The simple, direct statement hit Ethan like a physical force, bringing unexpected tears to his eyes that he blinked back furiously. Life happens to all of us. James continued gently. What matters is how we respond. With cruelty or kindness, with isolation or connection. You chose connection when you stood up for Daniel. You chose kindness when it would have been easier to walk away. Ethan stared at his hands, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. That's why we need voices like yours on the community action team, James said. Because you understand both sides, the needing and the giving. That's a perspective that's invaluable. Before Ethan could respond, Daniel bounded back down the stairs, book in hand, and the moment passed. But James's words lingered, a gentle counterpoint to the shame that had been Ethan's constant companion. The Thanksgiving break passed in a blur of holiday preparations. His mother managed to get the actual day off, and they prepared a small but special meal together. There was turkey breast instead of a whole turkey, mashed potatoes from a box, and canned cranberry sauce. But they set the table with their best dishes and lit a candle in the center. I have some news, his mother said as they ate. The hospital is offering me a training program to become a licensed practical nurse. It would mean better hours and significantly better pay. Ethan looked up in surprise. Mom, that's amazing. When would you start? January, she said, a cautious hope in her voice he hadn't heard in years. It's a 6-month program, and it will be intense. I'll need to study a lot, and there will be some late nights. She reached across the table to take his hand. I wanted to make sure you were okay with it before I accepted. The gesture, her consideration of his feelings, her inclusion of him in the decision, warmed him deeply. I'm more than okay with it, he assured her. I can help more around the house. And it's not like I'm a little kid anymore. Relief softened her features. No, you're certainly not. She squeezed his hand. We're going to be okay, Ethan. Better than okay. For the first time in years, Ethan truly believed it. The Monday after Thanksgiving break arrived with a tension Ethan hadn't anticipated. The list of students selected for the community action team would be posted after third period. And despite his attempts to temper his hopes, he found himself increasingly nervous as the morning progressed. Daniel was practically vibrating with excitement when Ethan saw him before biology class. Just 2 more hours, he whispered as they took their seats. Ms. Winters must have sensed the distraction in the air, as she dedicated the class to independent study rather than attempting to teach new material. Ethan tried to focus on his textbook, but the words swam before his eyes, his thoughts returning again and again to his application, to James's words, to the possibility of being part of something meaningful. When the bell finally rang, Daniel grabbed his arm. Come on! They're posting the list now. The hallway outside the main office was already crowded with students jostling for position. Ethan hung back, his stomach in knots, while Daniel pushed through to the front. Moments later, Daniel turned, his face split with a wide grin. We both made it, he shouted over the crowd. You, me, and Jessica. Relief and disbelief washed over Ethan in equal measure. He'd made it. His words, his perspective, they had been heard and valued. The first meeting of the community action team was scheduled for after school that same day. 12 students gathered in the conference room adjacent to the principal's office. A mix of grades, backgrounds, and social groups that would never normally intersect. James stood at the head of the table, his expression serious but pleased. Thank you all for being here. You were selected because your applications demonstrated genuine commitment to improving our school community. This isn't just about adding something to your college applications, it's about real change. He outlined the team's purpose and the projects they would oversee. Not just the holiday food drive, but ongoing initiatives throughout the year. Students would take leadership roles, with faculty serving as advisors rather than directors. Our first priority, James continued, is to revamp how we approach the Holiday Assistance Program. And for that, I'd like Ethan to share some thoughts. Ethan froze as all eyes turned to him. James nodded encouragingly from the head of the table. Your essay raised important points about dignity and giving, he said. I think everyone here would benefit from hearing your perspective. For a moment, panic gripped Ethan's chest. But then he saw Jessica's encouraging smile, felt Daniel's supportive presence beside him, and something settled within him. This was why he had applied. To make a difference, to use his experience to help others. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak, not from prepared notes, but from his heart, about how charity could wound even as it helped, about how the way we give matters as much as what we give, about how everyone deserves to be seen as whole, not defined by their temporary circumstances. As he spoke, he saw understanding dawn in his classmates' eyes, not pity but recognition, of shared humanity, of the thin line between giving and receiving that any of them might cross. When he finished, there was a moment of silence before James spoke again. "Thank you, Ethan. That's exactly the perspective we need to guide our work." He looked around the table. "This team has the potential to change how we approach community support at Westlake. Not just during the holidays, but year-round." The meeting continued with practical discussions of upcoming projects. But something had shifted in the room. A new awareness, a deeper understanding of the responsibility they held. As they filed out an hour later, James caught Ethan's arm gently. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That took courage." Ethan shrugged, embarrassed by the praise but warmed by it too. "I just said what I thought." "Sometimes that's the bravest thing we can do," James replied. "I meant what I said. Your perspective will be invaluable to this team." Daniel bounded up before Ethan could respond. "Dad, can Ethan come over for dinner again? We need to work on our biology presentation." James smiled at his son's transparent attempt to extend their time together. Of course, if Ethan's available. The invitation, so casually extended, still felt like a gift. Ethan nodded, a sense of belonging washing over him that had nothing to do with charity and everything to do with genuine connection. As they walked to the Pierce's car, Ethan found himself thinking about the strange, winding path that had brought him here. A bullied teen stood up for a kid, never dreaming the kid's dad was the school principal. That one moment of courage, of connection, had opened a door he'd never imagined possible. Ryan still roamed the hallways of Westlake, his cruelty tempered but not eliminated by the principal's watchful eye. Ethan's mother still worked long hours, their financial situation still precarious despite the promise of better days ahead. His father remained absent, a wound that might never fully heal. But Ethan was no longer defined by these circumstances. He was defined by his choices to stand up, to connect, to hope, by the friends who sat with him at lunch, by the trust placed in him by adults who saw his potential, by his own growing belief that his voice mattered, that his perspective could create change. As the December sun set behind bare trees, casting long shadows across lawns still green in the mild California winter, Ethan felt something unfamiliar yet unmistakable unfurling in his chest. The quiet certainty that he belonged. Not despite his struggles, but because of how they had shaped him into someone capable of empathy, of courage, of connection. A bullied teen stood up for a kid, never dreaming the kid's dad was the school principal. And in that one moment of unexpected bravery, he had found not just a friend, not just a mentor, but a new way of seeing himself as someone who mattered, whose actions could ripple outward to touch other lives, whose voice could help shape a more compassionate world. It wasn't a perfect ending. Life rarely offered those. But it was a beginning of healing, of community, of hope. And for now, that was more than enough.